Labour came to office, and the government's own profitability review is being rolled out at the slowest of speeds. So can I urge every honourable member who has sought to defend the government's record in this debate today to get real and recognise the dire situation rural Britain is in. This government has chosen to ignore warnings, dismiss experience and gamble with the livelihoods of the people who feed this country and care for this countryside. Farmers and rural communities see exactly what's happening. Our pubs and hospitality sector is struggling. They feel it. They are paying the price for it. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, rural communities will not forget who stood with them and who turned their backs.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to close this debate. And I have to say, even in the deep, bleak midwinter, I don't recognise the gloomy, barren landscape that members opposite have been describing. They describe a litany of disasters. If only they'd been in government for the last 14 years and been able to do something about them. As I go round our countryside, I see quite a different picture. Millions of people in rural communities who were taken for granted and underserved by the party opposite, and that's why they kicked them out at the last general election. On this side of the House, we are laser-focused on encouraging growth. And it is a Labour government that is now the party of the countryside. They should stop talking the country down and get behind our drive for growth. But let's look at the inheritance that they left with local communities. Broken public services, boarded up post offices, crumbling schools, sky-high NHS waiting list. They have learned no lessons, offered no apologies and showed no contrition, and that's why they were booted out of government. They had a Liz Truss mini-budget that crashed the economy, sending mortgages, rents and bills soaring. And who was the Financial Secretary to the Treasury when food inflation hit 19%? The Shadow DEFRA Secretary. I'm not giving way. I've got 8 minutes to respond to the debate. Their former Prime Minister was explicit about their policy of and saying there's a deliberate policy of taking money away from deprived inner city areas to give to rural areas. This government is cleaning up the mess they made. We've stabilised the economy, and I'm grateful. Well, I'm sorry that the gentleman for Winchester isn't in his place, because I cycled there from the New Forest during the COVID lockdowns, and I did the 25 miles, got to Winchester, but he talked a lot about the 61 bus, but he didn't mention anything about the rail fare freeze that is going to mean that his constituents are going to enjoy freezing of rail fares, as well as the freezing of prescription charges, £150 off energy bills, and the driving up of wages. And what did the Conservatives do in relation to each of those areas that will help people in rural communities? They voted against each and every one of those measures. They left the health service that was on its knees, our schools were crumbling, and they crashed the economy. So we've done more in 18 months than they have achieved in 14 miserable years. Cheaper mortgages, new rights for workers, and lifting 500,000 people out of poverty. And I want to come back to bus routes, because under the Conservatives and Lib Dems, bus routes in England declined by 50% since 2010. 8,000 services slashed on their watch. We have taken immediate action with the Bus Services Act, I will not give way, which includes provision to support socially necessary bus services, so important in rural areas. I'm grateful to have the Bus Minister on my side. And we have maintained the national £3 bus fare cap. We heard from... There was no cap under their government. They're shouting from a sudden. There was no cap. We've heard from the colleague from Sherwood about the problems with rural crime. During the 14 years of Conservative government, the recorded crime rate in rural areas of England and Wales increased by 32%. Our rural communities paid the price for the Tories being asleep on the job and those 20,000 police officers that they and the Liberal Democrats cut in 2010. We are ensuring rural communities will be better protected from the scourge of rural crime, such as equipment theft, livestock theft and hair coursing. We know these devastate communities, farming and wildlife, and that's why we've collaborated with the National Police Chiefs Council and the Home Office to deliver a renewed rural and wildlife crime strategy published in last November. My honourable friend for South East Cornwall asked about waste crime, and I visited my honourable friend's constituency in Lichfield to see the fly tipping that had gone on there. We know that waste crime blights our rural communities and it undermines legitimate businesses. The last government let waste gangs and organised crime groups run riot, with incidents rising by 20% in their last 5 years. And so we have announced what are we going to do. We are announcing we're bringing in, they consulted on changes in 2018. We are bringing them in this year. We are introducing digital waste tracking this year, end-to-end tracking of who is looking after. No, it's actually going to be operational from April this year. So the infrastructure is there. So mandatory digital waste tracking, reforming the permitting system, a system that was so loose that Oscar the dog could be a waste carrier, and tougher background checks for people carrying waste. And we'll require vehicles transporting waste to display their permit numbers. This was all prepped and planned and consulted on by them. The action is happening under this Labour government. Now, we've heard a lot of talk about land use framework. We are going to have to change the way we use land, because our landscapes need to change to support climate change mitigation and adaptation, economic growth, housing delivery, food production, clean energy, and to meet our statutory targets for nature recovery. And that land use framework will be published later this year. We had the Right Honourable Gentleman for Skipton and Ripon talking about informal employment relations. I'm old enough to remember when their government, with the Lib Dems in coalition, abolished the Agricultural Wages Board, abolished the Commission on Rural Communities, and their prime plan for rural prosperity was to sell off the nation's forest, which received uproar in the rural communities and which was the first U-turn of that coalition government. As the Minister for Forests, I have been visiting Hexham, and I stood amongst the pines and the spruce and the furze trees of Kielder Forest, a landscape bursting with growth, renewal and vitality. And I met the men and women who make that possible, and I met some of the businesses with my friend, the member for Hexham. We went to innovators at Egger in Hexham, one of Northumberland's largest rural employers, turning timber into panels that are found in homes and workplaces across the country. We have announced the first new national forest for more than 30 years in Bristol, Swindon and Gloucester, all around the west of England, and we're not waiting 30 years to announce the next ones. In November last year, we announced the creation of 2 more national forests, the Oxford-Cambridge corridor, and a competition will be launched for a 3rd new national forest in the Midlands or the north of England in early 2026. Tens of millions of new trees planted in the coming years alongside new infrastructure and new homes that this country needs. Now, I want to come on to some of the points raised in the debate. So I was asked about the Batters review. There were 57 points. The member for Wetherby and for Northampton South, I learnt a new word about YIMFI. Our priority is to get the implementation of this right, and we are considering all of those recommendations, but we will set out a detailed response to the Batters review in our 25-year farming roadmap. On firearms licensing, the Prevention of Future Deaths report into the fatal shootings in Plymouth said that there were problems in the firearms licensing scheme, and the fees for firearms licensing were last reviewed in 2015. So it is important that the additional revenue from firearms licensing is used to...
Mike Wood.
I beg to move that the question be moved.
The question is that the question be now put. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Andrew Snowden and Jerome Mayhew. The tellers for the noes, Gregor Poynton and Nezel Caliscan.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 105. The noes to the left, 332.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 105. The noes to the left, 332. The noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock! The question is that the proposed words be there added. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. I declare the question as amended to be agreed to. Right, we now come to the next part of the... Secretary of State for Defence, are you ready to make the statement? Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, with permission and with thanks to you for allowing me to do so at this late hour, I wish to make a statement to update the House on today's US operation and on yesterday's Coalition of the Willing summit in Paris. Today, the US conducted a military operation to intercept the motor vessel Bella 1 in the North Atlantic on its way to Russia. The UK, at the request of the US, supported this operation as part of global efforts to crack down on sanctions busting and shadow shipping activity. The Bella 1 was falsely flagged. It was falsely flagged and subject to US counter-Iran sanctions. The vessel refused to comply with the US's exercise of its sanctions jurisdiction on the 20th of December, after which the US Coast Guard vessel Monroe pursued the ship across the Atlantic. This is a sanctioned, stateless vessel which carries a long history of nefarious activity and shares close links with both Iran and Russia. Following a request from the US, I authorised the use of UK bases and the deployment of Royal Navy and RAF assets to support the operation, including airborne surveillance and the RFA ship Tide Force. This was a US operation. No UK personnel took part in the boarding. And I can update the House, Mr. Speaker, the operation is ongoing, but the Bella 1 is now under the control of US forces who demonstrated immense courage and professionalism in dangerous and deteriorating Atlantic Sea conditions. A stateless vessel, Mr. Speaker, may be lawfully intercepted and subjected to the law of the interdicting state. The US's enforcement action was based upon counter-Iran sanctions aimed at stopping Iran from fueling instability through the profits of illegal oil sales. The UK supported this action to achieve three objectives. First, to enforce counter-Iran sanctions. Second, to tackle the global security threat posed by expanding shadowy maritime activity. And third, to reinforce British homeland defence and security in this era of rising threats. Mr. Speaker, let me expand. First, in 2024, this vessel was sanctioned by the US and subjected to a seizure warrant for illegally transporting Iranian oil. It reflagged 5 times in the last 5 years and was falsely flying the Guyana ensign when it was intercepted by the US. Over a 4-year period, reports suggest that this vessel moved some 7.3 million barrels of Iranian crude oil, the proceeds of which are used to finance terrorism, threat and instability across the world. And the Iranian regime continues to export violence across the region through its proxies and its partners, including Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iraqi militias. It maintains support for Russia by supplying Putin with weapons for his brutal invasion of Ukraine, including the Shahid mass drones and missiles which target and kill Ukrainian civilians. And it is telling, of course, that this vessel, in an attempt to evade this seizure warrant, changed its name and tried to adopt the Russian flag. Second, Mr. Speaker, the UK also supported this military operation to counter the expanding global security threat. The vessel is part of an increasing web of shadow shipping that fuels and funds instability across the world, that undermines global trade, and that threatens our national security. We know Russia operates a vast shadow fleet of its own to bankroll its illegal invasion of Ukraine. And last year, it's estimated that Russia sold $100 billion worth of sanctioned oil, money directly funding attacks on Ukrainian citizens, such as the onslaught during Christmas, involving 600 missiles and drones, which killed at least 3 people. We owe it to the Ukrainians to step up action on these shadow operations, and we are. This is why we're deterring, we're disrupting, we're degrading the Russian shadow fleet as a priority for this government. And to date, we've imposed sanctions on 544 vessels. According to estimates, sanctions against the shadow fleet by the UK and our partners have forced 200 ships off the seas, almost half of the Russia shadow fleet's overall capacity. While Russia's critical oil revenues are now down 27% compared to October in 2024. This is the lowest since the start of its full-scale invasion. So let me speak plainly, Mr. Speaker. The UK will not stand by as malign activity increases on the high seas, and alongside our allies, we are stepping up our response against shadow vessels, and we will continue to do so. Third, Mr. Speaker, this is not just about international security, but about the threats to British national security too. Iran presents not only a persistent danger to security in the Middle East, but to us here in the UK. It poses a significant espionage threat, it sustains an aggressive cyber attack campaign against us, and as our own House of Commons Intelligence Security Committee reported, since 2022, the Iranian regime has plotted at least 15 assassination or kidnap attempts on British soil. Meanwhile, more widely across Europe, we're seeing a pattern of flagrant maritime activity coordinated by Russia. So I applaud and welcome the fact that the Finnish authorities seized a Russian shadow vessel suspected of damaging a communications cable under the Gulf of Finland last week. And we've exposed the Russian spy ship Yantar operating in our waters, surveying our undersea cables. And of course, by assisting our US allies in taking this ship off the seas, we are protecting the British people and our nation. So this is a stark reminder that our world is changing, it is less predictable and more dangerous. And this operation and the Shadow Fleet show the global links between the security threats faced by the UK and its allies. And the Shadow Fleet itself is vital to Putin's ongoing illegal invasion and war in Ukraine, which brings me on to the second topic in this single statement. Because next month, we enter the 5th year of Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Yet the Ukrainian people still fight with huge courage and defiance, the military and civilian alike. And I'm proud to say that this House remains united for Ukraine, that Britain remains united for Ukraine. We know that if Putin prevails, he won't stop at Ukraine. And we know that a secure Europe depends on a strong, sovereign Ukraine. And I'm also proud of the UK's leadership on Ukraine. It started under the last government and stepped up under this government. So now we, the UK, lead the 50-nation-strong Ukraine Defence Contact Group alongside Germany and secured £50 billion worth in military aid pledges last year. And we, with France, lead the Coalition of the Willing, undertaking detailed military planning to help secure peace for the long term when a deal is agreed. And I say to this House, let's make 2026 the year that peace is not only possible, but the year that peace is achieved. And this government is leading that push for peace. This government is building the New Deal for European security. And that's why in Paris yesterday, Mr. Speaker, at what was the largest yet meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, with 39 nations, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, alongside President Macron and President Zelensky, signed a declaration of intent. And as the Prime Minister said, the purpose of the Coalition of the Willing is to help deliver a peace that can last and to work with the US to guarantee Ukraine's security for the long term. This work is now more advanced than ever, he said. And yesterday's declaration advances that work significantly. It confirms that the UK and France will take a leading role, first in using military, economic and diplomatic instruments to ensure the conclusion of a peace agreement, second in supporting the development of Ukraine's defence capabilities, and third in commanding a multinational force for Ukraine, which plans to deploy to Ukraine after a ceasefire has been agreed. Mr. Speaker, the MFU plans to deploy units from nations in the Coalition of the Willing to carry out defence and deterrence operations in the air, on the land and at sea, to conduct training, planning, recovery and regeneration of Ukrainian forces. The UK and France will also create military hubs to support this work across the country and to build protected facilities within Ukraine for weapons and equipment. Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister said today, if there were a decision to deploy under this agreement that was signed yesterday, that matter will be brought to the House for debate beforehand and for a vote on that deployment. So yesterday, at this largest meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, we agreed further significant steps, including the signing of a joint declaration. We will also participate in US-led monitoring and verification of any ceasefire. We will support the long-term provision of armaments for Ukraine's defence, and we will continue to work with the US towards security guarantees to deter any further Russian aggression and to support Ukraine in the case of a future armed attack by Russia. In Paris yesterday, the US Special Envoy Witkoff described these commitments, and I quote, as strong as anyone has ever seen. And I will travel very soon to Kyiv to continue these discussions with Ukrainian political and military leaders. A secure Europe needs a strong Ukraine, but we can only get a peace deal if Putin is ready to make compromises. Over the Christmas period, he showed he is still not ready for peace. Hundreds of drones and missiles fired into Ukraine, Russian attacks continuing on the front line. So in 2026, we will continue with other nations to step up our military support still further. Our mission, both to support the fight today, as well as secure the peace tomorrow. And I say to the House in conclusion, our government will always act in the interests of national security. We're committed to countering the threats posed by our adversaries. We're committed to standing by our closest allies. And we are committed to keeping Britain secure at home and strong abroad.
Yeah. Shadow Secretary of State, James Cartledge.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I begin by thanking the Secretary of State for advance side of his statement and for the briefing he provided to myself and to other parliamentarians on today's operation. As the Leader of the Opposition said earlier, there should always be a statement to Parliament when UK troops are committed abroad, and we hope that the Secretary of State can provide a little more clarity than the Prime Minister was willing to earlier. In recent days, we have seen extraordinary international developments, particularly in relation to Venezuela, but it remains the case that the single most important military action of recent years affecting our nation's security is Putin's illegal and wholly unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. The ensuing war has led to terrible loss of life, and we all want peace. But it must be a lasting one. on acceptable terms to Ukraine and with credible security guarantees so that any post-ceasefire settlement can endure. As such, having led the way in supporting Ukraine at the outset of the invasion, and as the Leader of the Opposition said earlier today, we will absolutely support any efforts to help bring peace to Ukraine. Specifically, it is entirely right to plan for a ceasefire, and just as we brought together an international coalition to provide weapons to Ukraine, we welcome the way the government has worked with international partners to plan how a potential ceasefire will be supported militarily. As to the details of those plans, can the Secretary of State provide further information on the number of personnel involved? Earlier today, the Prime Minister did not give any specific details on troop numbers, yet the Times is currently reporting that the figure will be fewer than 7,500. What more can he tell us? Can he say more about the force composition to be deployed? Specifically, we note British soldiers will be involved in logistics and training, but what proportion, if any, will be actively involved in policing and patrolling of any border or demilitarised zone? And what air and naval assets does he plan to provide as part of the MFU? On rules of engagement, we note from the Joint Declaration of Intent that our service personnel, and I quote, will be granted the use of force to fulfil the mission of the MFU and cooperate in accordance with international law and respect for human rights as reflected in other international agreements whose participants are the signatories. Can he confirm this means that our soldiers operating in Ukraine will therefore be subject to the ECHR during any deployment? And can he state the exact mission of the MFU? In terms of other countries and their role, Mr. Speaker, the Declaration of Intent refers to, and I quote, other contributing nations, but does not name any countries from outside Ukraine other than Britain and France. So can he list those nations and what their primary contribution will be? On the crucial matter of security guarantees, there appears to be no mention of any such guarantees in the Declaration of Intent. So can he tell us what explicit security guarantees the United States have agreed to, and will they involve US boots on the ground? Of course, this force would only be deployed in the event of a ceasefire being agreed with Russia. So what is his contingency plan in the event that the ceasefire is broken after the MFU has been deployed? And doesn't this point to the most important consideration, that this whole plan is based on the assumption of a genuine ceasefire? And as someone who has personally and passionately backed Ukraine's fight for freedom throughout, I would dearly love to believe that this peace is possible and soon. But I fear that the occupant of the Kremlin is not interested in peace. So does the Secretary of State agree that in parallel to any preparation for the MFU, there must be no let-up whatsoever in the application of maximum economic pressure on Russia, along with all possible continued support to Ukraine? Turning to other developments, we support today's operation by the United States to seize the MV Belawan tanker in order to enforce sanctions on Iran. We also welcome the UK's enabling role undertaken by Royal Navy and RAF assets, and I agree wholeheartedly with the Secretary of State on the objectives he set out, not least reinforcing our homeland security. I'm pleased to hear the operation has been successful, and on behalf of the opposition, I pay tribute to all personnel involved and join the Secretary of State in recognising the skill and bravery of the US forces who participated. On the wider matter of Iran, Mr. Speaker, can I take this opportunity to express our solidarity with all those who in recent days have had the courage to defy that nation's despotic and repressive regime. Whilst I appreciate the Secretary of State will not speculate on operational planning by us or our allies, can he reassure the House that his department is conducting contingency planning in the event of any further escalation of internal unrest within Iran? On Greenland, finally, we totally support Denmark's sovereignty over that territory. Whilst the United States remains our closest ally, it is surely not in the interest of the US or any of our allies for NATO's shared commitments to be undermined to any degree. So given the Prime Minister did not answer the Leader of the Opposition earlier, can the Secretary of State assure the House that he will be seeking an urgent meeting of all NATO members to provide mutual reassurance on the matter of Denmark's sovereignty over Greenland? Finally, isn't the common thread in all of this that the world is becoming a more dangerous place, and therefore we must rapidly ramp up our own defence spending and rearmament? So can I ask him when he will finally publish the Defence Investment Plan?
Mr. Speaker, we are working flat out on the Defence Investment Plan. We will complete it and publish as soon as we can. On Greenland, the sovereignty of Greenland is not at issue. It is clearly Denmark sovereignty. It is clearly Greenland and Denmark are part of NATO. Its security is guaranteed by its membership and by all 32 nations of NATO. And any decisions on the future of Greenland are a matter for the citizens of Greenland and for Denmark. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to his more extensive questions and points about the declaration of intent yesterday and the situation in Ukraine. I welcome his commitment to seeing a lasting peace, a just peace, and I welcome his support for that. He pledged his support for all efforts to bring peace to Ukraine, and I welcome his support for our work in doing so. On the detailed questions, I'm simply not, and he as a former Defence Minister will well understand this, going to go into details about the nature of the activities in the deployment, the numbers of troops that are likely to be deployed to Ukraine, or the details of the commitments that other nations have made. The finality of that will depend on the details of the peace deal. The Honourable Gentleman quite rightly said we will deploy only in the circumstances of a ceasefire and a peace agreement, and to disclose, let alone to debate those sort of details, will only make Putin wiser. On the question of the deployment in future of any British forces, I'm proud to say that whenever British forces deploy, and whenever they deploy abroad, they meet the highest possible standards of international law and professionalism, and they will continue to do so. And in the numbers of nations committed and involved in the planning of the coalition, as the Prime Minister has said, and I've said in my statement today, yesterday's meeting was 39 strong. It was the largest meeting of the coalition of the willing yet. And I think yesterday's declaration of intent is not just a signifying an advance in our work towards the security guarantees and peace. It signifies a gathering momentum behind that. I just say to the Honourable Gentleman this: whilst he welcomes our support for efforts and pledges his own support for efforts to bring peace, he questions aspects of this deployment, aspects of this coalition of the willing, when his own leader has still not publicly backed the coalition of the willing, has still not publicly said she would support the future of the multinational force for Ukraine. And if and when she does so, then we will gladly see that as support for the security of Britain, the future of Ukraine, and the strengthening of our work with allies. Finally, the Honourable Gentleman said that Putin isn't interested in peace. He's quite right to say that we will not let up, and we should not let up, on intensifying the economic pressure. Part of my statement that dealt with the Shadow Fleet was a part of that. We should not give up or let up in increasing the pressure on Putin through the military aid and the military support we provide to Ukraine. And I can tell the House that I will co-chair alongside the German Finance Minister the next meeting of the Ukraine Defence Contact Group. We will do that at NATO next month, when we will be looking to ensure that we see the strongest possible pledges in stepping up support for Ukraine, both to keep in the fight today, secure the peace for tomorrow throughout 2026.
Chair of the Select Committee, Tamanjeet Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome advance sight of the statement today from the Defence Secretary, and indeed thank the Defence Minister for the operational briefing this morning. And also welcome the Prime Minister's progress with regards to the coalition of the willing. But of course it does nothing to change the reality on the ground as currently faced by our Ukrainian friends, nor the growing threats that we face. And of course we await precise details with respect to numbers rumoured to be approximately 7,500 British troops. So perhaps my right honourable friend can allay my concerns as to how our already overstretched armed forces will be able to meet their existing commitments, especially in Estonia. And Mr. Speaker, today's UK support for our US allies to enforce sanctions in the Atlantic demonstrates the strength and value of alliances. And does my right honourable friend agree that the future of Greenland is for Greenlanders and Denmark to determine, and that any attempts by a NATO ally to seize NATO territory would not be in our collective interest, least not of all America's?
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend and I welcome his work as chairing the Defence Select Committee, are entirely at one with the Prime Minister. The future of Greenland is a matter for the people of Greenland. It is part of the sovereignty of Denmark, and it is part of the sovereignty of a nation who is a full-scale and valued member of the NATO alliance. I say to my honourable friend, he is right to question, and he will get the chance to question me directly when I look forward to appearing later this month before his committee with his members on the question of the UK deployment and our commitments. This House will have, as the Prime Minister said at Prime Minister's questions, the opportunity to debate those detailed issues if and when any commitment and decision to deploy troops, to follow up what he made clear, quite rightly, was a political statement, a declaration of intent, significant for advancing our work to secure Ukrainians' future, but nevertheless a political declaration, and this House will have the chance to debate in full the concerns that members have, the consequences that there may be for any future deployment into Ukraine, and the terms on which we will do so.
James McCleary, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Mr. Speaker, we all hope for peace in Ukraine. Years of brutal conflict caused and perpetuated by Russia have taken a terrible toll. There is much, therefore, to welcome in the announcement that the United Kingdom and France are prepared, alongside partners, to deploy forces to Ukraine after a ceasefire. This is not about escalation, it is about deterrence, reassurance, and making peace durable, rather than temporary. We have been clear that Ukrainians are not just fighting for their own freedom, but for all of Europe. In return, we should be prepared to secure and make durable a fair peace deal. We should be clear about the purpose. Any deployment must be focused on defending Ukraine, strengthening deterrence, and supporting Ukrainian forces, not fighting a new war, but preventing the old one from restarting. It must sit firmly within international law, with clear rules, oversight, and the consent of this House. That matters even more at a time when trust in American guarantees is under strain, when rhetoric about annexing Greenland escalates, or when international law is treated as optional. Europe has a responsibility to step up in defence of principles that underpin our security. So does the Secretary of State accept that this announcement and other global events intensify the urgent need to increase defence spending to 2.5% and beyond? The Paris Declaration states that the force would only be deployed after a credible cessation of hostilities. Can the Secretary of State give some detail on what that means in practice? If it refers merely to a ceasefire, would British troops be expected to conduct combat operations if hostilities were to suddenly resume? Today's US operation to seize a Russian-flagged tanker supported by the UK reminds us of the deep and enduring security partnership our two nations have built. It is important and it is worth defending, but not at the cost of our values and our principles. The Shadow Fleet is one of the primary ways that Russia is funding its war in Ukraine. Legal action to diminish that fleet is welcome and stands in contrast to US actions in Venezuela, which represent a blatant breach of international law. So does the Secretary of State recognise this distinction? And is he prepared to guarantee that UK bases will not, in any circumstances, be used to facilitate operations that breach international law, including any attempt to invade or annex Greenland?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in my statement, I think I made clear that I took the decision to allow the US forces to base themselves in the UK because we took an assessment about the legal basis and the purpose for the planned US operation. That is our responsible thing to do. So I think the honourable gentleman should have absolutely no concern on that front. He rightly says that the shadow fleet is one of the primary ways in which Putin is funding his illegal invasion of Ukraine. That is why we are stepping up action on the shadow fleet, developing further military options and strengthening coordination with allies. And in many ways, he's right also to say that Ukraine is fighting for the rest of Europe. They are fighting for the same values. They're fighting for the same hopes and aspirations to be a country free to determine their own future. And on the circumstances of any deployment, the Prime Minister has been clear, and I've been clear to this House a number of times in updates on the coalition of the willing military planning, that the decision to deploy, the military plans that are prepared, will come into action in the circumstances of a peace deal being agreed. It's one of the reasons I stressed in my statement, Mr. Speaker, that we are working to support the securing of that agreement, as well as then the long-term peace that we all hope will follow. And finally, he urges me to support his argument that the imperative to increase defence funding to 2.5% and beyond, to entirely do that. He would welcome the fact that this is a government that has made a difficult decision to switch funding directly out of overseas aid into defence, to do so because it recognises this new era of threat that we face, an era of hard power, strong alliances and strong diplomacy. And finally, just to say to him, we are doing that at least 3 years before anyone expected us to do so. We have an ambition and a commitment then to move that beyond to 3%, and we have made that commitment, that solemn commitment alongside all other 31 nations in NATO alliance, that we will spend 3.5% on core defence, a total of 5% on general defence and national security by 2035. It's a sign of the strength of the NATO alliance, the unity of the NATO alliance, and its ability to help make Britain more secure, as well as stronger abroad.
Then Emily Thornbridge, the Foreign Affairs Select.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I begin by thanking the Secretary of State for his statement, congratulating the brave men and women for this successful operation, and paying tribute to the Prime Minister for his clear leadership in the defence of Ukraine. My question is this: is there anything more that we can do to ensure that Vladimir Putin is serious about peace?
My right honourable friend is entirely right. There's one man that stands between the continuing war in Ukraine, the continuing civilian deaths and attacks on domestic infrastructure, and that is Vladimir Putin. There's one man that has talked of peace but has yet to demonstrate that he's serious about doing what he says. Important steps, to answer my honourable friend's question, are keeping up the economic pressure on Putin. It's beginning to tell on his economy, it's beginning to tell on his oil revenues, it's beginning to tell on his people, and at the same time we make clear that we will step up our collective military aid to Ukraine, as we are doing. And finally, we make clear, as this House has always said, we will stand united for Ukraine as long as it takes.
Rishi Sunak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Defence Secretary for his statement this evening? And on Ukraine specifically, can I commend him, the Prime Minister and the Government for their continued efforts? I think this whole House will be proud of how Britain has led on this from the very beginning. The future of Ukraine, and indeed the security of Europe, is an issue of vital UK national interest. a point he and others have made. Now, I believe three prerequisites for a lasting peace in Ukraine are firstly a Western military presence there, secondly credible and durable security guarantees, and thirdly a well-armed and resourced Ukrainian military. So in his work with allies in the weeks ahead, will he ensure that any ceasefire or peace agreement does not give Russia a veto in any of those three vital areas?
Secretary of State.
I welcome the right honourable gentleman's echo for my pride in the way that the UK, under his government and set up again under this government, has led on Ukraine. My pride also in the way that Britain remains united behind Ukraine. He's right about his three conditions. They are part of ensuring what this House wants to see, which is not just peace, but one that is lasting and secure. And the importance of the discussions and agreements, the importance in particular of the comments from Special Envoy Witkoff yesterday about the US's commitment to security guarantees that sit alongside and match European-led guarantees through the coalition of the willing could not be more important. And they will form the basis of the confidence that President Zelensky can have in going into the negotiations. We hope that they will add extra impetus to those negotiations, and in the end it will be a matter for President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people, the deal that they strike with President Putin, and in the meantime we lend all the support we can to President Trump, doing what only President Trump can, which is potentially putting the pressure on Putin, bringing the parties together and trying to broker the deal that will finally put an end to this terrible war.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's statement and the bravery of our service personnel who will have to consequence manage the result of such a military action today. This ship was not only part of an expanding global security threat, which was used to fund Ukraine, but it was also used to fund the nefarious activity that occurs here in the UK, the sub-threshold attacks and payments received by reform politicians like Nathan Gill. So we must wake up, because these attacks undermine our sovereignty and our way of life. And so it's asinine that the opposition uses moments like this to progress false arguments about the ECHR in rules of engagements for events that we aren't presently at. So would the Secretary of State agree with me that it is imperative that the opposition stand up and show on which side it is and sack its Shadow Attorney General?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend speaks with great military insight and authority on the challenges of the deployment, the challenges of the operation that was conducted in some of the most extreme weather and seas that any military force can face. He is also right to point out how this is a bad ship. This was sanctioned by the US in 2024. It changed its flag 5 times in the last 5 years. It turned off its transporter for almost 2 weeks on the 17th of December, so no one could track its whereabouts. And last month, it was sailing with a false flag before heading to Russia. And it's very telling which country then reportedly sent out a warship in order to try and escort it into a Russian port. So no one should be in any doubt the purpose of the US operation or the legal basis for it doing so. In relation to the question about the support for the deployment, the potential multinational force for Ukraine, I think the most serious equivocation has come from the leader of the Reform Party, which, when asked today about that, simply said, forget it. And I just say to the two representatives from his party in the chamber today. He did. That is an insult to Ukrainians. It does not do justice to the sentiment of the British people that recognise the fight of the Ukrainian people, that want to see them prevail and want to see, above all, a peace that will last.
Lincoln John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Secretary of State's statement here this evening? And I hope it's been heard widely across the world. I hope it's been heard in Moscow, and I hope it's been heard in Washington, and I hope particularly it's been heard in Kyiv and across Ukraine, because I want the people of that country to understand that this House is totally united in support of their aims. And I personally do not wish to see peace at any price. I wish to see Ukraine prevail. And I hope that I speak for the whole House in that respect. But with that context, I would still like to ask, the Leader of the Opposition asked the Prime Minister earlier on today about the numbers which had been committed. And the Prime Minister said, let me be very clear about what was agreed yesterday. Military plans were drawn up some months ago, and I have updated the House in relation to that. There are figures being briefed to the newspapers. I don't know whether those figures are correct. I think that the Secretary of State owes it to the House to brief the House on the numbers that he is considering. I may wish them to be higher. Some other members of the House may wish them to be lower. But I would just like this House to hear what his plans are.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I really welcome the honourable gentleman's response, his question, the way that he speaks for the House, and his urging that this is a statement, and indeed the declaration of intent that was signed in Paris yesterday will be recognised around the world, particularly heard in Kyiv, and I'm sure President Zelensky will ensure that. I will play my part in doing that as I shortly visit the country and will discuss the further work that needs to be done with their military and political leaders. On the question of detailed numbers, yesterday was a political declaration, it was a political statement. The detailed military planning that has been going on for months with the participating, contributing nations in the coalition of the willing means that we are ready if and when a peace deal is signed. The deployment that will follow that will clearly depend on the circumstances and detail of that peace deal. And I am not willing, and I have certainly not been briefing into the media at all, because any discussion of details of numbers, very detailed activities, only makes Putin wiser, only undermines the confidence that the Ukrainians can have in the guarantees that we're developing with them and for them.
Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome this government's commitment to providing security guarantees for Ukraine, which are vital to the defence of Europe and to upholding peace on our continent. But military resolve alone is not enough. Deterrence requires financial guarantees that underpin our security commitments today and in the years ahead. Can I ask the Defence Secretary, will the UK join other nations in seeking to establish a multilateral defence, security and resilience bank so that Britain can protect itself, stand firmly with Ukraine and uphold our responsibility to defend peace in an increasingly dangerous world?
Well, my honourable friend is entirely right that part of the long-term commitment that we and other nations have made to Ukraine isn't just about our military support, isn't just about the deployment of a multinational force into Ukraine, it's about the financial support that Ukraine will require for the long term. And we are certainly interested in the proposals that she has been championing. Led by the Treasury, this government has been in discussions with those that are developing proposals like that, and will continue to do so because they potentially have a very significant role in contributing the sort of financial investment that we must see in Ukraine for the long term.
Claire Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, the UK remains one of the chief facilitators of the export of Russian gas. UK-owned or insured vessels have enabled the export of £45 billion worth of Russian gas since the start of the war. Will the Secretary of State finally agree to ban the provision of all UK maritime services for the transport and insurance of Russian gas exports?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, where there are grounds for us as a nation and a government, particularly where we can do so alongside close allies, we have done so. We've done so against individuals, we've done so against organisations, we've done so against vessels, and we have sanctioned 544 ships that are part of the Russian shadow fleet operation. Wherever there are grounds to do more, we will look at that, but I won't get into speculation or hypotheticals about future potential moves that we might make with economic sanctions.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's statement and pay tribute to his leadership and that of the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister on this issue. And I welcome the statement of the Coalition of the Willing on their commitments to deter further Russian aggression. I'd like to ask, do those commitments extend to preventing the further forced deportation and militarisation of Ukrainian children? And if, as has been widely reported, we are 90% of the way towards a peace agreement, does that mean that Putin has agreed to hand back the more than 20,000 Ukrainian children that he has stolen from that country?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend speaks with great passion and emotion about this. One of the most, I've had the privilege of visiting Ukraine a number of times, and one of the most moving things I've done on any of my visits was when I was there jointly with the former Shadow Foreign Secretary. We met some of those children that had been abducted by and kidnapped by the Russians and rescued and brought back to Ukraine. The impact on them and their families was deeply moving, and she's totally right to say this must be, and it is, I know it's in there in the Ukrainian mind, at the forefront of ensuring that this practice is prevented and that the return of all Ukrainian children that have been kidnapped by Russia are returned in the very earliest stages of any peace negotiations.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State coming to the House to update us on the commitment made by the Prime Minister last night. But I want to put on record I express serious concerns about the commitment to put British troops on the ground. And I say so. Over the last 30 years, I do not believe we have learnt enough lessons of how to pull troops out of locations. On some of those deployments I've been on, we could potentially be setting the UK forces up for a long-term sustainable conflict or peacekeeping over in Russia where we don't have the resources to do that sustainable. We need to look at things like funding, troop deployments and numbers, increasing the armed forces to do this. And the outgoing SACEUR at NATO believed that a full-scale global conflict would come between 1 and 3 years of cessation of fighting in Ukraine, where if that is the case, and many others believe that, our troops will be right in the front line. We'll go from peacekeeping to full-scale war because we put ourselves in there.
Well, the honourable gentleman speaks with military experience, and he's one of the authoritative voices in this House, so I respect what he says, and I would just say respectfully to him, that is exactly why the Prime Minister has said and confirmed today that in the circumstances of any decision to deploy UK troops into Ukraine as part of the leadership and commanding of the multinational force for Ukraine, this House will have the chance to debate that. It will have the chance to vote on it.
David Griffith.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I very much welcome the Prime Minister's leadership in the signing of the Declaration of Intent, but the vicious attacks by Putin on Ukraine over Christmas suggest that peace is still a long way off. So I wonder if my right honourable friend would update us on the military aid and support that we are providing to Ukraine, and can he give us reassurances that where there are depletion of stocks, they are being backfilled?
Secretary of State.
Yes, indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I believe I can, to my honourable friend. This is a government proud of the fact that this year we have provided the highest ever level of spending on military aid directly to support Ukraine. Proud of the fact also that we are capable and are doing the delivery of some of the most important military equipment that they need, for instance, air defence systems and missiles. And proud also that we work especially closely with the Ukrainians to help them develop new systems, new missiles, new weapons, to try and stay one step ahead of the Russians, and we will continue to do that.
Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Defence Secretary's statement today, but I just want to press him a little bit on the issue of a vote in Parliament. His statement, page 5, is pretty much the same as the Prime Minister's. I would expect that will be brought to, quote, the House for a debate beforehand and for a vote on that deployment. That is not the same as having a vote before the deployment. Now, there are very good strategic and military reasons for not making it very public before an immediate or surprise or secret deployment before it becomes public. But this is a public planned deployment as set out in the Paris Agreement. Couldn't become more public than that. So would he commit to a vote in this House before the deployment, not a debate in the House only? He will know in 2013, he was in the House, I think he came in 97, Prime Minister, now the Lord Cameron of somewhere in Oxfordshire, Chipping Norton, beautiful Oxfordshire, Chipping Norton, there was a vote, and that vote was lost by 13 votes. As a result, the UK did not deploy RAF support of the Americans into Syria. So it's right that the government gets the balance right. I support what the government is doing, although we have to see the detail, but would he commit to a vote before deployment, not just a debate?
State.
I have to admit, I'm struggling to follow the concern that the honourable gentleman expresses. I quoted in my statement, I'm quite happy to repeat it here, the words of the Prime Minister today in this House when he said, I would put that matter to the House for a debate beforehand and a vote on that deployment. I think that is pretty clear and couldn't be clearer.
Kevin McKenna.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for his statement, and I'd really like to commend our incredible servicemen and women who've defended our interests here. I'm increasingly worried, as are many members of this House, about the shadow fleets and the way that they're operating in the world, and particularly with 2 international ports in my constituency. I'd like my honourable friend to tell me and reassure my constituents how the workers, the sailors and the companies operating out of Sheerness docks and out of Ridham docks are going to be protected at the sea in the future by the United Kingdom.
My honourable friend pays rightly the tribute to the professionalism of our UK forces. They played an important supporting role to back up what was essentially and entirely a US operation today. But it is a demonstration of the professionalism. It's also a demonstration of the fact that we, with the United States, work together as the closest possible defence and security allies, something that this government is committed to continue to do, and our troops and our forces are proud to do so.
Smith.
Speaker, the Secretary of State knows my support for the government's persistence over Ukraine, and I therefore welcome his statement today. We've spoken endlessly throughout this process. I am, however, deeply worried about deploying British troops into what is basically a First World War, as it were. It's with over 2 million dead or wounded as a result of the conflict. It puts it on a wholly different scale from anything we've been doing in the last 10 or 20 years. Afghanistan and the others are very small by comparison with what we're discussing. So I have a certain amount of cynicism, but I will support the government to pursue that. But I worry desperately that we get this out of proportion. that are we peacekeepers or are we going to enforce the peace? These are big questions to be asked before full support can be surely given. But there's one thing I think the government can do, and very simply it's this. He talked about Iran and the shadow fleet and the support they've given to Russia and the brutality they have, and I absolutely agree with that. So I have a simple question for the government. Will they now prescribe the IRGC, who are at the heart of everything that is bad, deceitful and despicable from Iran, will they now prescribe, the British government prescribe, the IRGC full stop?
State.
The honourable gentleman returns to a subject that's been raised, debated in this House before. He was a member of the previous government. He'll know that in advance of any decisions, they're never disclosed or confirmed by government ministers in advance. On the concerns that he expresses, first of all, I welcome his support for the government's decision and participation and leadership of the Coalition of the Willing, and for the declaration of intent signed yesterday. The three things. First, there will be no deployment unless there is a peace agreement. Any deployment of a multinational force for Ukraine will be only deployed into Ukraine after a peace deal. Secondly, the role of that force is primarily reassurance, the regeneration of the Ukrainian forces, and deterrence of any future Russian aggression. We would do that alongside similar commitments and security guarantees being negotiated with the United States. And finally, the role of any British forces is to ensure that Ukraine, as I've argued to this House before, is its own best deterrence, is its own best defence against future Russian aggression, which is why the primary focus of the multinational force for Ukraine will be to regenerate the strength of the Ukrainian forces, and we're ready to do that alongside them for the long term.
Just for colleagues to plan, I intend to take everybody, but this depends on the length of questions, because we could be here for quite some time. So please, can questions be short and the answers be just as short as well? Turquoise Crichton, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement and pay tribute to the role of the Royal Navy and RAF personnel in taking out this rogue tanker flying under the flag of a rogue nation. The Bella 1 was taken just a few hundred miles out into the Atlantic, which is too close for comfort if you come from the Western Isles. And I understand Stornoway and Benbecula Airport hosted USAF aircraft, Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft out of Stornoway and 2 V-22 Ospreys out of Benbecula. Can the Minister give us more details on the role of Scottish airports in this operation? And does he agree with me that, yes, we have a front line in the Donbass, but the front line for us against Russia is our backyard, the wild North Atlantic?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you for your encouragement for short questions and short answers. My honourable friend is right on both accounts. Part of the British and European front line is in the Donbass. He's equally right that part of the front line for this nation and for NATO is the North Atlantic. And I am proud of the way that Scotland makes such a considerable contribution to the security of this country. And I'm proud of the way that part of the basing that was important for the US operation was indeed also in Scotland.
Again.
Speaker, I wholeheartedly endorse the resolve across this House to continue to help Ukraine to prevail against this aggression, and by extension, therefore, commend the Armed Forces personnel who enabled and assisted the US in this very slick interdiction of a rogue vessel, a key element of the funding of Russia's war in Ukraine. There are other challenges in the high north as we speak. Our allies in the United States are very concerned about the vulnerability, apparently, of Greenland to Russian and Chinese aggression. What discussions has the Secretary of State had with our partners in the Jeff nations about discussing with the Greenlandic peoples and the government of Denmark about how the Jeff may deploy to Greenland to allay those US fears?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure that the US and the US military will welcome the strong support from the Scottish nationalists for their operation, and the congratulations the honourable gentleman offers, and I shall ensure that the UK Secretary for War is aware of those. Look, on the question of the forgive me, I forgot. On the question of Greenland, quite simply, look, I've been in contact with the Danish Defence Minister. The Prime Minister was very clear in the joint declaration that he signed yesterday in Paris. Greenland is part of Denmark. The sovereignty is not at stake. It's defended by being part of NATO. Its security is guaranteed by all 32 nation states, and any future for Greenland is that a matter for the Greenlanders alone and those of the citizens of Denmark.
Luke Meyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome this government's decision to increase defence spending to the highest level since the Cold War, and the Teesside Defence and Innovation Cluster stands ready to support the national interest. But will the Defence Secretary do everything possible to ensure that across the defence industrial supply chain it is British steel being used, so that national security is also economic security for Britain too?
Secretary of State.
I welcome my honourable friend's observation that national security is founded on economic security. Economic security is dependent on strong national security, and as an MP from the proud steel-making town of Rotherham, I'm very conscious of the commitment that this government has made and the imperative to ensure that as much as possible of what we procure through defence and more widely within government uses, whenever we can, British-produced steel, which is amongst the finest in the world.
Barclay.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Defence Secretary refused to say when the Defence Investment Plan would be published. And there's a tension between the statement talking about the immediacy of the growing threats and the lack of urgency on funding as other areas of government are prioritised. Does he recognise that other nations are moving now on funding? And why is the government complacent on funding that it is prioritising other departments over moving now on defence?
Secretary of State.
Well, I certainly don't accept the right honourable gentleman's characterisation. We've made a commitment as a new government, extra $5 billion into defence. We've made the commitment to 2.5% of GDP 3 years before his own unfunded commitment at the election. We will raise that further. And as far as the work on the Defence Investment Plan, we are dealing, of course, with a programme that we inherited from his own government that was overcommitted, it was underfunded, it was unsuited to the threats that we now face. But we are working flat out to complete that Defence Investment Plan, and I will publish and report the details of that to the House as soon as I can.
Natalie Fleet.
Defence Secretary. I also welcome comments from across the House on how the Prime Minister has been conducting himself and leading the coalition of the willing. At this time, we need consensus across British politics on how we support Ukraine. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that no British politician should ever be taking bribes from Russians or advising Russian nationals on how to avoid sanctions for money that should be used to support Ukrainian people?
I do agree with my friend, and the actions that she speaks of bring discredit on the party of Putin. It brings discredit on this country. And I also welcome her comments on the importance of cross-party support and support throughout the United Kingdom for the actions we're taking to support Ukraine.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. We congratulate all those involved in taking and boarding the rogue ship in the Atlantic, and I'd also like to congratulate the Prime Minister and the government in securing from the US the strongest security guarantees, the strongest commitments. That is clearly good news. The leadership of the coalition of the willing many will be questioning why 37 of the 39 countries have not committed to put boots on the ground. And can I just correct gently the Secretary of State? What the Honourable Member for Clacton said about putting boots and kit into Ukraine is to ensure that we can do that on a long-term, durable basis. The government needs to increase its defence spending earlier and faster than currently planned.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm sure everyone in the House would like to hear from the leader himself, if he'd like to participate in a session in the House of Commons chamber rather than the press conferences, and perhaps let's hear from himself. Look, on the I say listen. Beyond that, I welcome the fact that he is here. I welcome his support for the actions the government is taking, and he is completely right to point to the importance of the US statements in public and the Special Envoy Witkoff that said that these security protocols that are being discussed and being developed and agreed with the US and with us and with Ukraine are as strong as anyone has ever seen.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his statement and thank him and the Prime Minister for their leadership in this issue. I wonder, he referred in his statement, quite rightly, to the actions of the Finns last week in intercepting a rogue ship that was cutting or suspected of cutting cables. He also mentioned the operation of the Yantar, which has been spying in our cables. So, given the activity of the Russians in the High North, does he agree with me that the deal with BAE Systems and Norway isn't just important because of the frigates that will be built, but it's also important because it's a sign of the cooperation that our two countries have, that we have as NATO allies, and that extends across the High North, with the exclusion, of course, of Russia?
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend is entirely right, and I know she is very proud of the constituents who are part of the workforce that will build these frigates. This isn't just the biggest ever British warship export deal. This is going to set a new standard of countries, Norway and the UK, that are prepared to be able to combine and integrate their forces, and by doing so we'll be in a stronger position to help deter Russian aggression and reinforce the security of the High North in future years.
Andrew Morrison.
Speaker, the Defence Secretary said that one of the functions of the MFU will be to deter aggression, but you only have a deterrent if you have the willingness to engage kinetically, backing it up. So if this matter comes back to the House for a vote, will he be clear on the rules of engagement for the deployment of our troops? Will the status of forces agreement with Ukraine be explicit? And does he envisage the triggering of the Reserve Forces Act in order to sustain the sorts of numbers that have been floated in the press today?
State.
Well, the honourable gentleman is entirely right. The rules of engagement will be a critical part of the security guarantees, and the sort of points he raises today will be, I'm certain, at the heart of any debate if we reach the point at which we have a peace deal and at which we are making a decision to deploy the multinational force.
Absana Begum.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We do not want an endless war in Ukraine, and the people of Ukraine, and indeed here in the UK, need to see steps towards peace in the world, not more chaos, division and war. Could the Defence Secretary confirm whether, if the United States were to seek to seize ships taking, for example, oil to Cuba, where the US has unilateral sanctions in place against, would this government aid it?
Secretary of State.
Well, I think my honourable friend wouldn't expect me to be able to be prepared to answer sort of hypothetical questions. What I can say to her, that if the US, as our closest defence and security ally, asks for UK assistance, we will always be willing to respond. We will ensure that any support that we do offer, whether that is support or whether that is a combined operation, will be legally, have a strong legal basis, as indeed this one today that has been mounted so effectively and early indications successfully has been.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The Secretary of State said in relation to Ukraine, "We will continue to work with the United States towards security guarantees." I regret that President Trump has continued to undermine NATO this afternoon, writing, "I doubt NATO would be there for us if we really needed them." That flies in the face of the experience of 9/11, post 9/11, when Brits and Danes fought with Americans in Afghanistan. How would the announcements from Paris yesterday differ if there was no prospect of a US backstop?
Well, with respect to the honourable gentleman, things have sort of moved beyond that point. Jared Kushner yesterday confirmed the readiness for the US to provide a backstop. And Special Envoy Witkoff said that the President, and I quote him, strongly stands behind the security protocols that are being agreed. So I would say to the honourable gentleman, catch up, number one, but secondly, he is right, of course, that the only time that Article 5 has been triggered was when NATO responded to the US's request following 9/11. We were proud to be part of that. And we're now proud to be a leading part of a 32-nation-strong NATO.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the decisive leadership of the Defence Secretary and the Prime Minister in support of Ukraine. When the Foreign Affairs Committee have met with the Ukrainian government, they have highlighted the necessity of a strong sanctions regime, which is joined up internationally. And the actions taken today show that. A sanctions regime with teeth that's joined up to stop those loopholes which Putin uses to keep funding his illegal war. So I welcome the action taken today, and can the Secretary of State assure the House that the government will continue to increase the stranglehold of sanctions and action to freeze and seize the assets, and what will be done with those assets to enable that they can be used to rebuild Ukraine both now and in the future when peace comes?
I can indeed give my honourable friend the reassurance that we will do everything we can to step up the economic pressure on Russia alongside other allies, that we will step up our activity and pressure and action in relation to the Shadow Fleet, and at the same time we will step up with allies the military aid that we provide to Ukraine so that Ukrainians can be in no doubt. We as a country, alongside others, will stand with them for as long as it takes, both in the fight and in the peace.
Alex Shalbrook.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, in 1995, thousands of innocent men and boys were taken from a UN protectorate in Srebrenica and murdered. The main reason that happened was because the UN troops were unable to fire upon the Bosnian Serbs as they came along. So may I just push the Secretary of State further about the rules of engagement? The rules of engagement must not say, do not fire until fired upon, otherwise there is no deterrent. And I know that this has got to be worked out, but I may ask him to take that into serious consideration when these rules of engagement are being put together.
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we will indeed, to reinforce the honourable gentleman's point, the purpose of the proposed and planned multinational force is to deter Russia. The rules of engagement will be entirely consistent and important in supporting that.
Dr. Stevenson there.
Deputy Speaker, we clearly face the most dangerous times in almost a century in this country, indeed across our continent. And our safety and our security since 1945 was guaranteed by being part of the most powerful military alliance in the history of humankind and sacrosanct borders in Europe. The times are clearly changing. So can the Defence Secretary assure me and assure this House that we will fulfil the aims of the SDR in full, fully fund it to protect both ourselves and our continent?
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend is right, the times are changing. He is also right that the role of NATO, which has been outstanding in protecting us and preserving the peace for more than 7 decades, is critical to that. And this is an alliance which isn't just the most successful defensive military alliance in history. It is one that is stronger now, is larger now, is more united now, and we're proud to play a leading role within that alliance.
Dr. Ellie Chance.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given that the Americans are clearly perfectly capable of seizing the ship by themselves, I wonder why it is that they were so keen to involve the UK. In a week in which Trump has ridden roughshod over international law on Monday and threatened a NATO ally on Tuesday, why is it on Wednesday that the UK was so keen to hang on the military coattails of Trump when it doesn't have the courage to call out and condemn his breaking of international law earlier in the week? And if the UK is so very committed to enforcing sanctions, given the concerns in the OFSI report published last year about the extremely high likelihood of UK financial services companies being complicit in supporting breaches of sanctions, can he, hand on heart, assure the House that the UK has done everything in its power to prevent that complicity of the UK financial services sector?
Secretary of State.
Look, Madam Deputy Speaker, if there is sound evidence of sanctions breaking, we will look at that and we will act. But I'd just say to the Honourable Lady, that in response to the question she started with, quite simply, the US asked for our UK military support because they wanted and they needed our UK military support to conduct this operation. And the legal basis for us doing so was sound. The purpose for this action and operation was strong, and we were proud to support that action, which is part of bearing down on these sanction-busting shadow fleet operations.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister for their leadership on defending Ukraine, not just in the wartime but also in the peacetime, and that will really reassure the many Ukrainian families who have sought refuge in Milton Keynes and across the UK. But I'd like to ask his advice. It's clear that Russia are not just challenging Ukraine, but they are challenging the UK. They are creating incursions into our airspace and into our water. They are using cyber attacks to undermine us, and they are using social media to undermine our democracy. What advice would he give the British public in terms of creating vigilance against those Russian attacks that we are seeing increasing over and over on the UK?
My honourable friend is right. This rising Russian aggression isn't just directed at the UK. At the same time as fighting a war in Ukraine, Putin is testing the boundaries of other NATO nations like the UK. The simple response is to say to people, we are in a new era of threat. This demands a new era for defence. It demands a stronger NATO, and that's exactly what we're working to deliver.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the action today and commend our armed forces on their action. Much of the discussion has focused on troops in the event of peace. I'd like to take us one step further. The Right Honourable Gentleman said that yesterday the UK agreed that we will participate in US-led monitoring and verification of any ceasefire. Can the Right Honourable Gentleman please clarify whether this means physical monitoring or remote intelligence? And what if the terms of a ceasefire are unacceptable to Ukraine and to the UK? Does the agreement signed yesterday, which it says we will do so, does it require us to accept and police and monitor any ceasefire, or will we be able to withdraw if those terms were not acceptable to neither us nor our allies Ukraine?
Secretary of State.
I understand why the Honourable Lady, who's very expert in these things, is asking these questions. She's getting rather ahead of the stage of either the peace negotiations or the detail of the technicalities of any potential ceasefire monitoring. The commitment was a political commitment that we would play a role. It is likely to be led by the US in the context of a peace deal. And the important aspect of this is that what the Prime Minister was part of signing and helping to agree and announce yesterday significantly advances that work towards not just securing and putting in place security guarantees, but by doing so, it significantly advances the work towards that peace.
Paul Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The people of Rochester are extremely proud of a long-standing Ukrainian community, which is made up of both those who fled Soviet terror in the 20th century and those who sought refuge from Putin's crimes in the 21st century. Does he agree that the one thing that Putin fears most is Western unity?
Yeah.
And he fears most unity and cross-party consensus in houses like this one in democracies across the West? And does he agree, therefore, that if Reform MPs vote against deployment of our brave British troops in Ukraine, that would be the biggest gift to Putin since Nathan Gill took that bribe from the Russians?
I do indeed agree with my honourable friend. He speaks warmly and rightly of the strength of pride that Rochdale has in their Ukrainian community. He's right to point out that Putin's purpose is to divide NATO, to weaken NATO, and to set nations against each other, and to set people within nations against each other. And we in this House should all determine that we will not let that happen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for his update? He's a serious and experienced politician. I have no doubt that he always acts in the national interest. What concerns me is the gap between the coherence of NATO and their approach, and the approach that he set out that we will take if a peace agreement can be found in Ukraine, and the determination that we are seen to have to meet the new level of threat that exists from Russia and elsewhere in the world with respect to the commitment on defence spending. I respect that he asserts that the government is committed to 3% between 2029 and 2034, but with the greatest respect, there is a great difference in the timeframes of that 5-year window. In previous generations, this country has had to make sacrifices to defend this country. I think he needs to think about whether we should be making that case now so that we can be ready for what may be ahead of us.
So the Right Honourable Gentleman was, of course, a distinguished government and Treasury Minister in his time. He'll recognise that the commitment that we've made and the plans that we got now is the biggest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. He'll recognise that also what we are doing is building a new deal for European security. It's an important part of NATO, but it goes beyond NATO, and we'll continue to do that.
Go in, distinguished Joe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank the Secretary of State for his statement. Madam Deputy Speaker, the unity of this House in opposing those states who would do us harm is a key foundation of our strong national security framework. But does the Secretary of State therefore agree that when a senior leader in Reform accepts Russian bribes, and when the Shadow Attorney General is actively working to undermine a key policy in support of Ukraine, this does damage public perception of the unity of purpose of this House, and in doing so impacts our national security?
It does damage the unity of this House. It damages the unity of purpose, and it also damages the status of Britain when we have a party leader that also says the politician and leader he most admires is Vladimir Putin.
Lisa Roberts.
Many of our constituents will be anxious about UK involvement in US operations, given Trump's vocal drive for American imperialism. And of course, my party is unequivocal that any action taken by the UK military must respect international law. That includes today's events and all others. But this is my question. With oil further politicised following the US seizure of the Bella 1, with UK support, what steps will be taken to secure critical UK oil and port infrastructure at key sites such as Milford Haven and Holyhead, given recent global developments in energy and shipping?
I thank the Honourable Lady for that question. I think if she considers and reflects on the Strategic Defence Review that we published in June, it set out a very strong case, not just for the rising threats, but also for action to step up our defence of the homeland. And that Strategic Defence Review sets out the vision that we will pursue and the action that we will take over the next 10 years.
Dr. Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the statement of the Government this evening. And I am proud that Suffolk is home to one of the largest air bases in this country. Now, British military families have been in contact with me this afternoon, very alarmed at the deterioration in the security situation. So what reassurance can the Minister give to them?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'd say to my honourable friends' constituents, those who are serving in the military, that is quite widely shared, a growing anxiety that underlines the recognition of the new threats that we face, and it argues for exactly the sort of commitments to defence funding. It argues for the strategy that this government has set out and the action and decisions that we're now taking. And I hope his constituents will support both the Prime Minister's declaration of intent in Paris yesterday because of the importance of Ukraine to our long-term security, and I hope they will also support and recognise the professionalism of the US operation on the Bella 1 today.
Julian Lewis.
Does the government accept that if you will the ends, you must will the means? The end of the Cold War has been mentioned a number of times. It is a fact that at the end of the Cold War, we were spending 4.3% of GDP on defence, 3.5% under the old way of calculating it. And in the early years of the Cold War, we were spending in excess of 7%. So can the Secretary of State at least indicate to the House what is the earliest year in which a Labour government anticipates spending 3% of GDP on defence?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, of course, at the end of the last Labour government, we were spending 2.5% on defence, a level that the 14 successive Conservative years came nowhere near matching. So we have a job to make up for that lost time. We have a job to make up for the hollowed out forces that the previous government left. And the commitment that this government has made alongside other NATO allies in 2020-35 to see a path to ensure that we spend on our security and core defence a full 5% of GDP alongside allies is our guarantee for strong defence and deterrence in the future.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For 5 years against Russian aggression, Ukraine has been bravely defending not only its own border, but also the eastern flank of Europe. And so security guarantees for Ukraine are also security guarantees for all of Europe. Given this, does my right honourable friend share my concern that the leader of Reform today suggested that he would vote against those security guarantees?
I do indeed. My honourable friend is right, because a secure Ukraine is at the heart of a secure Europe and at the heart of a secure UK. And that will be a consideration, I think, for all members of this House if we get to the stage where we have a peace deal and we have a decision to deploy and command the multinational force in Ukraine.
Vicky Slade.
Madam Deputy Speaker, President Trump is supposed to be working on a peace deal for Ukraine, but has been so much more focused on invading Venezuela and making threats against Greenland. So what assurance can the Minister give to the House on the US continued commitment to getting a deal in Ukraine, and what contingencies are in place to revisit the EU-led proposals should they be necessary?
I have no doubt, and I'm surprised the Honourable Lady has any doubt about the determination of President Trump to help secure that peace deal in Ukraine. In fact, he has a role to play that only he can play in making that potentially possible, and I think it's our job to lend every support we can, both to the Ukrainians and to the US, in securing that peace deal.
Noah Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yes. What's proposed today is a peacekeeping force. I wonder if the Secretary, as I do, wonders when the leader of Reform will cease his adulation of Putin, ensure there are no further traitors among his ranks, support this peace process in Ukraine and stand up for British interests.
Just to be clear to my friend, the primary purpose of the multinational force for Ukraine is not peacekeeping. It is there to reassure Ukraine, it's there to regenerate and help them rebuild the strength of their military for themselves, because in the end it is Ukrainian forces that are their own country's best deterrence and best defence against potential future Russian aggression.
John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given Russia's stated refusal to accept any deployment of NATO troops on Ukrainian soil, is there a danger that this agreement will actually make Russia less likely to accept a settlement and it will instead step up their military campaign? If that is the case, can the Secretary of State say whether there was any agreement amongst the Western allies about how we can massively increase the pressure on Russia, perhaps through further sanctions and their strong enforcement, as we have seen in the last 24 hours?
Well, the right honourable gentleman tempts me to try and comment on hypothetical what-ifs. What I can say is that security guarantees that are being agreed at this point are an essential element of any potentially successful peace negotiations. And those negotiations will test, and if they reach agreement, will test what at the moment Putin says is his approach to Ukraine and the future of Ukraine.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for his statement and leadership. As the member for Portsmouth North, the home of the Royal Navy, I want to pay tribute to all of our armed forces and to ask the Secretary of State whether he agrees that continued strong UK leadership from our Prime Minister and commitment and consensus across the whole of this House with our allies is vital to enforcing sanctions on Russia and strengthening security and achieving peace in Ukraine, and in doing so, Madam Deputy Speaker, ensuring security in my port city and in Britain too.
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I warmly welcome my honourable friend's support for the statement and the wise words that she set out for the House today. She speaks with great authority and great strength for her home town and her city, and I think the House will have welcomed the words she's got.
Ben Obsojecti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd just like to start by recognising the US service personnel from my constituency who played a part in the coordination of the interdiction operation to seize the MV Bella 1 via the Joint Intelligence Analytics Centre Europe at RAF Molesworth, which is part of the US European Command. But turning to the coalition of the willing, and I'm slightly worried that this might be a moot point. The presence of boots on the ground in Ukraine was a red line for Putin, and I worry that this potentially might be a stick that he beats us with in order to push back on any peace deal. But workshopping this idea, clearly with a force of 7,500 that's being reported in the press currently, we can't realistically maintain a deterrence force posture, which would explain the commitment to military hubs, and I would appreciate clarification as to what exactly they are. But it underlines the paucity of our A2AD options. So with Ajax off games for the foreseeable, maybe years, and no viable recce strike capability, what assessment has he made of the urgency to bring forward the next iteration of Project Asgard from Q2 to Q1, given its urgent requirement as a force multiplier on the eastern flank defensive line?
Secretary of State.
The honourable gentleman is quite right to point to the importance of Project Asgard. It is breaking new ground. It's demonstrating new technologies, new military techniques. It is Britain at the forefront of creative military innovation and technology, and we're determined to accelerate it. On the wider question of the peace negotiations and red lines, look, the nature of any negotiations is always that declared initial positions get tested, and if a successful process of peace negotiations is secured, then we want to be ready, and we are ensuring that we are ready to play a role in securing that peace for the long term through the multinational force for Ukraine.
Mike Reader.
Madam Deputy Speaker, does the Secretary of State agree with me that in Northamptonshire, despite Reform UK banning the showing of support for Ukraine in my county, that my constituents and those across the whole of the UK should be proud of the extraordinary skill of our British men and women who are involved in this operation?
Secretary of State.
I share my honourable friend's dismay at the decision of his Reform-led council. I just say to him, I am proud that our Ministry of Defence building flies the Ukrainian flag.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. He's explained that he doesn't want to be drawn on the questions by the Shadow Secretary of State of Defence and others on troop numbers and the exact nature of the forces that's being conceptualised to be put together. But I do think it's more than reasonable for members on this House to ask to make sure the correct and right amount of resources financially being put in. So can I ask, based on the decision made yesterday, has that changed his assumptions and plans regarding investment, procurement and spending over the next year?
Secretary of State.
The political declaration that the Prime Minister signed with President Zelensky and President Macron will sit alongside and is developed from the detailed work on the military planning for the coalition of the willing and the deployment of the multinational force for Ukraine. And it is an important part of the contribution that the UK will make in the future to the security of the UK and the security of Europe.
Ballinger.
Like the member for Boston and Skegness, I am very concerned that the leader of Reform UK has gone on television today to reject sending British troops to Ukraine to help secure a sustainable peace. That is exactly what he said. And so does the Secretary of State agree with me that he should be ashamed because we owe the Ukrainian people who fought so hard to secure democracy in Europe, and it shows for real how close the leader of Reform is to Putin's priorities above the priorities of the UK.
Order, order. We don't need chuntering from the backbenches, and I can determine if the House has or has not been misled. Secretary of State.
I welcome my honourable friend's observations. I think this is a test of the leader of Reform. Are the interests that he declares closer to those of President Putin or closer to those of the British people?
Dr. Danny Chambers.
I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his statement this evening. And it was really reaffirming to see the whole House express their unwavering support for Ukraine. We hope our Ukrainian friends take heart from this. We have discussed this evening the heartbreaking situation of over 20,000 Ukrainian children being abducted by Russia. For this act alone, is it the government's position that President Putin should be hauled in front of the International Criminal Court?
Secretary of State.
Our first focus at this point, I have to say to the honourable gentleman, is to ensure that we give maximum support and step that up alongside allies to keep the Ukraine in the fight, and that we are ready from day one, if there's a peace deal, to play our part in helping lead efforts to secure that peace for the long term. And that peace must involve the full return of all those abducted children. It must involve also the pursuit of justice.
Jonathan Davis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Secretary of State's statement and the generosity of his answers at this late hour, but I want to express my sincere gratitude to the British forces, men and women, who have helped seize this tanker, part of the Russian shadow fleet being used to fuel Putin's illegal war in Ukraine. And I also want to thank this Labour government for its record investment in our defence. Concerning the Russian shadow fleet specifically, can he tell me that no stone is being left unturned to protect our critical undersea infrastructure, which is a regular threat from the Russian shadow fleet, and if it was terminally interrupted, that would cause absolute chaos here in the UK?
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend is gently chiding me for overlong answers, and I take that point. He's entirely right about how critical to our way of life, the operation of our economy, and the way that we live is dependent on undersea infrastructure. It's why we're stepping up our vigilance, our surveillance, and our defence of that.
Ian Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State will know that the NATO Secretary-General said in September that we must prevent spreading NATO forces too thinly. I wonder if he could provide some reassurance to the House on the implications of this potential deployment for the Joint Expeditionary Force and our leadership of that in Estonia.
Secretary of State.
I hope the reassurance that the honourable gentleman asks can be provided by the fact that Sophia has been at the heart of the discussions and developments and close to the military planning for the deployment of the multinational force for Ukraine, and an important figure in the discussions of security guarantees.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do want to thank the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister for the leadership they've been shown both at home and internationally on this issue. And I also want to pay tribute to 3 rifles from Edinburgh South West who deployed to Finland late last year and were training right up to the border with Russia with their brothers and sisters from the Finnish army. Westminster might feel cold in some places today. It was -28 when they were in Finland. Absolutely incredible. I don't doubt, though, that the same troops now are thinking about what the statement today means for them. And I know from past deployments that their families will also be thinking about what it means for them. So can the Secretary of State commit to any plan that comes to this House for a vote also includes consideration of support for families? And if troops are deployed for Scotland, that will include input from Forces Children Scotland. Thank you.
Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are going out of our way as a government to ensure that our British forces and their families can feel that we're a government on their side, that we take seriously and we want to hear their voices. And it's one of the reasons that we have already legislated for a new Armed Forces Commissioner that will be the independent challenge to government, to ministers, and the independent voice to those forces and their families.
Shannon. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State very much for his statement. I think we're all very encouraged by the Secretary of State and what he said, encouraged by the Secretary of State's leadership, encouraged by this government's leadership, and it gives us heart as well, so thank you for that. Russian fighter planes counterfeiting fellow NATO countries' skies, cables under the sea being interfered and damaged by Russian forces, interfering with those Royal Navy ships on the sea and on the water and in the air. United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland will not be messed with. It is time, Secretary of State, that Russia got a bloody nose, and today they got just that, not before time. This is a fraught international matter, and maritime laws are not my forte. However, something that I am certain of is that Russia is no ally of ours. Their words never ever meet their actions, and the sanctions need to be strengthened. Will the Secretary of State outline what discussions have taken place with the US and NATO to discuss a way forward that sends a clear message to Russia that the time of pushing boundaries is over, and today is a clear expression that we will stand firm against aggression within the confines of international law? Thank you.
I welcome the honourable gentleman's congratulations for the operation, and just say to him I hope he will see that this is part of the UK working to support our closest defence ally, and the US taking action to ensure that sanctions regimes that are designed to bear down on countries like Iran and Russia for illegal shipping activity will be stepped up, will be enforced, and will help put some of the economic pressure on those nations to change their ways.
Kevin Bonavia.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also commend the Defence Secretary and the Prime Minister for their calm and determined resolve in defence of Ukraine. And beyond that, Ukraine has no truer friend than this country. Now, Putin knows that too, and that is why he would never tolerate a democracy such as ours, nor have a debate or the questions such as we've had here this evening. And because of that, he will do everything to undermine this country. So, I ask my right honourable friend, what can not only his department, but a government as a whole do to ensure that we as a country have the resilience to take whatever Russia may throw at us?
Secretary of State.
I'd say to my honourable friend, if he refers back to the Strategic Defence Review that we published in June last year, he will see the identification and explanation of the sort of increasing threats and risks we face, and he will see the recommendations which we've accepted and we will implement in full, including for how we deal with the need for greater resilience and the need for stronger homeland defence.
Klinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that, in addition to the strong diplomatic and military leadership that he set out in his statement, it is wherever possible the unity of this House, and indeed unity in the country at large, that really counts in sending a very clear and strong message to our friends and foe alike that this country believes in the international rules-based system, international law, standing up to bullies and valuing our alliances?
I do indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend is right. In this new era of threat, this is an era also that demands hard power It demands strong alliances, it demands sure diplomacy, but what all of that is based on is a domestic political unity of values and unity of intent, and I'm proud of the way that the UK sets a standard for that.
Final question, Mark Seward.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the statement this evening, and I would just say to those, primarily outside this chamber, that any deployment of British forces in Ukraine is not going to be a tripwire to a wider conflict. If we don't deploy those forces, if we don't put that deterrent in place, if we don't back Ukraine, if we allow Putin to take Ukraine either now or at some point in the future, that will have devastating consequences for British interests and global stability. But with British interests in mind, and fully appreciating the answer he's given previously on troop numbers, I understand his reasoning for not wanting to share those. Can the Defence Secretary reassure this House that this country has the soldiers, the resources, the equipment to ensure that we can provide an effective deterrent in Ukraine without compromising and undermining the other commitments we've made to allies across the world?
Secretary of State.
I can indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and in recent months I have been making sure that Defence has been putting in the investment to ensure that at the point of peace that we are ready to move, we're ready to deploy, and above all, with the safety of our forces in mind, they are properly equipped and they're properly protected to do the job.
That is the end of the statement on Ukraine and wider operational update. Point of order, Adam Jogi.
Thank you very much.